Hello Warrior Flute Project and welcome back. On my last video we talked about the major scales, the 7 major scales that the All-State Audition has you cover. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the Chromatic Scale, which is the 3-octave scale that the All-State Auditions requires. The great news about this is that once you learn it for 7th and 8th grade, it's the same scale you're going to need for the rest of the way up into your senior year. So that said, I wanted to just demonstrate a little bit how I practice and how I teach that scale to young flute players, just to get them comfortable with the 3 octaves that the full range of the flute can have. So to start the first octave, I start slow and steady because I want to be able to program all of the correct notes as you're learning the scale. If you're very, very new to the scale and have never played a chromatic scale before, a really helpful, wonderful way to practice this scale is with a fingering chart that goes all the way up to the high C. So I think the ones that we find in our regular early band books, the method books, the red books, it doesn't go as high as the high C. So looking online for a 3-octave flute fingering chart will get you to the high C that we're looking for this particular scale. So that said, let's start off with the slow first octave. And again, like I practice the major scale, I also practice the slow first octave first. And that's simply going. So that's the first octave of the chromatic scale. And if you were to visualize this scale on a piano, it's when you go from a white note to a black note, white note, black note, white note, black note, so that you have a series of half steps all the time throughout the scale. So that's the very the music theory side of how the scale is constructed. But you can talk to your band director, talk to your private teacher if you have one about the chromatic scale, and they're going to definitely be able to guide you through this. If you were to take the fingering chart and just read every single box of the fingering chart as you go up to the high C, you're going to end up with the chromatic scale because all fingering charts sort of work in that same philosophy, in that same style. So that said, that's just the first octave of practicing. I like to also incorporate the articulation of the scale from the very beginning so that I start with very clear tongue all the way up and then slur all the way down, just even if I'm working slowly octave by octave. So once I got the first octave down pretty comfortably, then I move over to the second octave and I practice that octave by itself. So that was the first octave first, and of course the second octave second, and I isolated them individually by themselves. And now, once I get very comfortable, say like week 3 of doing those on their own, then I may add all of them together. So now, say like week 3.5, I may go. Now, I'm lucky enough to be able to play that in one breath, going up, and in one breath coming down. But I want you to think about it, if you must, and of course 7th and 8th grade lung capacity being a little less, you might want to breathe after every octave just to give you a point of arrival or a place to go to. So in the first octave, I may go, breathe. So that way you have a very specific places where you're going to take that breath. Of course, as you start to add speed to the scale, it becomes a little easier with the breath going further. So you want to just try to keep those landmarks for breath for you in case you need those. Now, moving away from that, I always practice the third octave of the scale completely separate from the rest of the scale because it's the trickiest one there is, and it's also in the really high register of the flute. So when I practice that octave, I isolate, which means by itself. So I may start on this C, so that's just working on that third octave of the C, and I had a note that I chipped, sorry about that. But the idea is that you want to be able to go all the way up and down smoothly and clearly with those notes. Now, a fun trick is that there's two ways that you can kind of get around what we call the turn of the scale. That's when you go for the high B natural to the C. Now, you can do the regular fingering, that's the regular, using the B natural to C fingering, but you can also get around that fingering using what we call the trill fingering, and that's doing a high B fingering and then wiggling the thumb right here. That will get you around that turn. So when you play it really fast, if you use that fingering, it just makes the turn really quick and clean at the very top of the scale. So this is with the trill fingering. So I like to show my students that kind of turnaround on that top of the scale so that they can use it if they need it. And then of course, finally, after like a couple of weeks of practicing it this way, on the last turnaround is that I do the whole scale as a whole. So that's this. So that's the whole scale in its entirety, 3 octaves, and how you can think about practicing it. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, you can always send me a quick email at warriorfluteproject@gmail.com. You can also leave a message here on the Facebook channel, or you can reach out via Instagram and also leave a message there. So hope you have a happy time practicing and preparing. Good luck, and see you around. Thanks. Bye.